There is a kind of silence that doesn't look like silence. It looks like waking up before everyone else. It looks like sweeping floors while others are still asleep. It looks like hearing "she will manage it" before anyone even asks if she wants to. And the strange part is this: no one calls it pressure. No one calls it work in the emotional sense. It's just normal. But what happens inside a girl who grows up inside this normal? Not loudly, not dramatically, but slowly, in ways even she cannot explain. She learns to notice small things before anyone else does. She learns to read moods from footsteps. She learns that rest must always feel earned. And most dangerously, she learns that being needed is the same as being valued. And one day, without realizing it, she stops asking what she wants, because she already knows what is expected. But here's something no one tells you. The human mind doesn't forget its unmet self. It only learns how to hide it better. And sometimes, in the middle of folding clothes, washing dishes, or organizing someone else's chaos, a quiet question appears. If I stopped doing all of this, would I still matter the same way? And the answer to that question changes everything. Not outside, inside. Because that is where the real story begins. Not in the work itself, but in what the work slowly builds inside a person's identity. And if you've ever felt like your value is tied to how much you do for others, you might already understand more of this story than you think. But the deeper psychology behind it, that's where things get uncomfortable. Because it was never just about chores. It was about learning who you are allowed to be and who you are not. There is a moment in almost every household where a young girl hears something that doesn't sound important at the time. Just help a little. You're better at this. You understand the house more. Small sentences, almost harmless. But the mind doesn't store words as words. It stores them as roles. And roles, once accepted early, become identity before awareness even arrives. At first, it feels simple. You help. You learn. You adapt. And you even feel proud sometimes. Because being trusted feels like growing up. But slowly, something shifts. You notice something strange. When something goes wrong in the house, it's noticed quickly. When something is done right, it is expected quietly. No celebration. No pause. Just continuation. And the brain, without permission, starts building a pattern. If I keep things running, I reduce tension. If I reduce tension, I stay safe. If I stay safe, I stay accepted. It sounds logical, but it comes at a cost no one names. The cost is self-erasure disguised as responsibility. Now here's where psychology gets interesting. The human brain is wired to seek belonging before it seeks individuality. So when belonging is tied to usefulness, the mind chooses usefulness every time, even when it is tired, even when it is overwhelmed, even when it is quietly breaking. Because breaking is risky, but disappearing into usefulness feels safe. And that is how many girls grow into a version of themselves that is highly functional, but internally disconnected. There is a strange duality that forms. On the outside, capable, reliable, responsible. On the inside, exhausted, unsure, quietly asking, is this all? And the more capable they become, the less space they are given to stop. Because capability becomes expectation. And expectation rarely asks for consent. Pause and reflect on this for a moment. How often do people thank you for what you do, but never ask how you feel while doing it? That gap is where emotional fatigue grows. Not from work alone, from being unseen inside the work. There is another layer most people miss. When a girl consistently takes on household responsibility, her mind begins to associate care with identity. Not, I take care of things, but I am the one who takes care of things. That difference sounds small, but psychologically, it is everything. Because tasks can be put down, but identity feels dangerous to release. Even imagining not doing it creates guilt. And guilt is powerful. It doesn't need logic. It only needs conditioning. Over time, she may start experiencing something she cannot explain clearly. A discomfort when she rests. A restlessness when things are not in order. A quiet anxiety when others are doing things wrong. It is not perfectionism in the traditional sense. It is hyper-responsibility conditioning. The mind learns. If I don't handle it, it may fall apart. And even when nothing falls apart, the fear remains. Now imagine living years inside that internal system, where your nervous system is always slightly alert, where relaxation feels incomplete, where help feels like something you must first deserve. This is where emotional exhaustion becomes invisible, because from outside, nothing looks wrong. But inside, the mind is constantly on. And there is something even deeper. Many girls in this pattern do not feel angry first. They feel guilty for imagining rest. They feel guilty for wanting space. They feel guilty for being tired. They feel guilty for thinking about themselves too long. And guilt, when unchallenged, becomes self-discipline. Not the healthy kind. The kind that never switches off. Pause for a second. Ask yourself honestly. When was the last time you rested without earning it in your mind? Not physically resting. Mentally resting. Without thinking, I should do something first. That question alone reveals a lot. Because the real issue is not effort. It is the belief that worth must always be maintained through effort. Now let's go deeper into something subtle. There is a psychological concept called role reinforcement. It means when someone is repeatedly placed in a role, praised for it, or relied on for it, their identity begins to merge with it. So if a girl is repeatedly seen as the one who manages things at home, she may slowly stop being seen as someone who has needs and start being seen as someone who meets needs. And over time, even she begins to forget the difference. This is where emotional invisibility begins. Not because anyone intended harm, but because patterns repeated long enough start feeling like truth. And breaking a pattern requires something most people don't have space for. Awareness. Not just awareness of what they do, but awareness of what it costs them internally. Now here is a real-life pattern many will recognize. A girl finishes her work. She sits down for a moment and immediately hears, "Can you also do this? Just one more thing. It will only take a minute." And she gets up, not because she wants to, but because her nervous system has already learned that saying no creates emotional discomfort she may not be able to handle. So she chooses peace over pause, again and again, until pause feels unfamiliar. But here is the hidden consequence. The mind that never gets true pause does not stay calm. It becomes quietly resentful, not towards others at first, towards itself, for not knowing how to stop. And that is where emotional conflict begins. Because part of her wants rest, but another part feels unsafe in rest. And this internal split creates something very important. A life that feels full, but not fulfilling. There is a moment many people reach later in life. It often comes quietly, not as a breakdown, but as a question that appears during ordinary work. Who am I when I am not needed? And that question can feel unsettling, because for years, being needed was the definition of being important. But here is the truth that slowly emerges for many. Being needed is not the same as being known. You can be relied on deeply and still not be seen fully. And that realization changes how everything feels. Now comes a subtle twist. Because the same traits that created exhaustion, responsibility, attentiveness, care, consistency, are not flaws. They are strengths. But strengths without boundaries turn into self-neglect. The problem was never care. It was never responsibility. It was the absence of space where the self is also included in the care. And once that realization enters, something begins to shift internally. Not instantly, but steadily. There is a new awareness. I can be responsible without disappearing. I can help without becoming the role itself. I can rest without guilt being the price. And this is not rebellion. It is redefinition. Now imagine a different version of the same girl. She still cares. She still contributes. She still notices what needs to be done. But she pauses before automatically stepping in. She asks herself a quiet question. Is this mine to carry? And sometimes she still says yes. But now it is a choice, not a reflex. That difference changes everything inside the nervous system. Because choice restores identity, and identity restores balance. Now, before this ends, there is something important to understand. This is not a story about blaming households. It is not a story about rejecting responsibility. It is a story about invisible conditioning that many people grow inside without noticing. And the most powerful part of awareness is this. Once you see a pattern, you cannot fully unsee it. And that creates space. Space between you and automatic behavior. Space between expectation and identity. Space between what you do and who you are. And in that space, something very quiet begins to grow. Self-recognition. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. Now imagine this as the final thought. A girl standing in her daily routine. Things still need to be done. Life still continues. But for the first time, she feels something different. Not pressure, presence. She notices her own tiredness without dismissing it. She notices her own thoughts without pushing them away. She notices that she exists beyond the roles she performs. And that realization is small, but it is not weak. It is the beginning of returning to herself. Because the deepest truth in all of this is simple. A person who only knows how to take care of everything will eventually need to learn how to take care of themselves too. Not as a reward, but as a right. And once that shift happens, even ordinary days start feeling different. Not because life changes immediately, but because the person living it has finally started to return home to themselves. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment for such awesome content.